Book Mob episode 79. Today I'm going to be talking about Jack Carr's new book, CRY HAVOC. If you're familiar with Jack Carr, you'll know that Jack Carr is a former SEAL who has written 7 previous novels about SEAL operator James Reece. They have made an Amazon series on book 1, The Terminal List, and I think they're going to be, it's almost finished, they've finished making series 2 from book 2, The True Believer. Now, okay, so that's the first 7 novels are about the SEAL operator James Reece. Now, CRY HAVOC is now James Reece's father, Tom Reece, who was in the book a SEAL operator in the Vietnam War. Now, the Vietnam War, the American Vietnam War, probably ran from early to mid 60s to 1975, and during that time, loads of war and battles taking place in Vietnam. However, there was a sticking point in the fact that North Vietnam, the NVA, were using Laos and Cambodia through the cutting of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which ran from North Vietnam through Laos and Cambodia and into South Vietnam. So they were using those countries to bring down thousands upon thousands of troops and thousands of tons of military equipment, food, and using the Ho Chi Minh Trail as a way to, prevent them getting bombed out of existence by American B-52s. However, I'm sure they were bombing Laos and Cambodia as well. But I think it's essentially because of the Geneva Convention of 1954, which I'm sure America signed to, it basically said that Americans could not, because Laos and Cambodia were as deemed neutral in the Vietnam War, which meant that America could not use conventional ground forces in the war to even though the NVA were using Laos and Cambodia to smuggle troops and arms and things like that down the Ho Chi Minh Trail into South Vietnam. So what happened was the American command decided to work and organize what they call the MACV-SOG, which is the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observation Group. And that entails sending teams of soldiers, troops, into Laos and Cambodia, small teams who would go and gather intelligence, would report on troop movements, things like that. So it was important that the MACV-SOG had in a way, they were fighting a minor war in response to the big war going on in Vietnam. Because like I said, the NVA were using the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and Cambodia and plugged directly into South Vietnam. Now, this book takes place late 67 and goes through 68 during the Tet Offensive. Now, the Tet Offensive basically was armed and supported by the thousands of troops and equipment that was sent through the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and Cambodia. Therefore, MACV-SOG was sending in these sort of insurgency small groups of troops who would then, like I said, gather information and obviously fight and kill and get into battles. In a sense, also CRY HAVOC is trying to demonstrate that this war that was taking place was not underhanded. I mean, it depends on whose side you're on. Of course, it's underhanded. But I guess he's trying to explain in a fictional form how there was this sort of little war going on that was extremely dangerous with a very, very high casualty rate on the American side. I've read a factor about up to 50% of MACV-SOG operators were killed, not just wounded, killed. So that is a very, very high casualty count. But because of the small numbers of men doing these missions, they, I guess, supported the fact that they were acceptable losses in order to try and prevent more Tets. Now, I'm sure they were operating before 1968, and I guess there was some way that you couldn't really stop the gravity of North Vietnam trying to win back the South. They just poured thousands and thousands and thousands of men and equipment. They basically, every single life was put on the line, and you're fighting, even though you're fighting a great war machine like the United States. The United States did win many, many battles in Vietnam, but lost the war in Vietnam. Now, there's a scene where Tom Reece is in Saigon with one of his fellow soldiers, Quinn, and they are there overnight in the early morning when the Tet Offensive started in February of 1968. There are a couple of scenes where Reece and Quinn are called upon to fight the NVA and the Viet Cong, who had sort of suddenly blossomed out of the grounds and started attacking air bases, barracks, hotels, basically going in there, the NVA going in there and taking care of business. Okay, so the one thing that Jack Carr tries to present in this is that at the same time in the war, the journalists, after the Tet Offensive, the perspective really changed. Don't forget, the journalists coming into the war up until 68 were given carte blanche. Journalists could go anywhere. They could get on. They even had honorary rank as captains, I think, journalists, and they could go anywhere. They just hopped on helicopters, went to battles, filmed it, talked about it, wrote about it. And then after the Tet Offensive, I guess the shock of the sudden invasion of South Vietnam, even though militarily it was a disaster for the NVA in terms of casualties and loss of equipment, because the Americans fought off the Americans and the South Vietnamese, I should say, fought off the North Vietnamese army and the Viet Cong in that long campaign of the Tet Offensive. Anyway, so you get this. So Jack Carr gives you this coalface account of Tom Reece and Quinn fighting through the early battles of the Tet Offensive. They were in one scene. They were called the CIA. One of the CIA agents who's working in South Vietnam gets them, and Tom Reece and Quinn want to go to the American embassy because they've heard the American embassy has been overrun by the Viet Cong, and the CIA bloke says, no, I need you to do something for me, and so that's where the kind of reality, the true story stops, and some of the Jack Carr's fiction comes in, because Tom Reece and Quinn go up and they save a French business owner and his daughter from the hands of the VC, who had come up to murder all these aristocrats who had been drinking and enjoying the coming New Year at a party at a hotel. And this is where, in a sense, Jack Carr gives a nod to the 1979 film Apocalypse Now. There was a scene in the original cut, the French plantation sequence, in which Willard, while he's going up the Nung River, encounters a French family operating a rubber plantation in the middle of the war. And, basically the French, that this is a holdover from the French colonial period. Now, the full plantation sequence was added to Apocalypse Now Redux in 2001 because it was not in the 1979 original cut of the movie. So basically, there's a French father and a beautiful daughter who Tom Reece falls in love with, and have this torrid affair in the sweaty hotels of Saigon. And so there's a break between the actions, and all this plays into the future role that Tom Reece plays as a character in the James Reece books, which is mainly as a memory, because Tom Reece becomes a CIA agent after his initial activities as a SEAL in Vietnam in 1968 and 69. Okay, now the other men sort of nod to Apocalypse Now that Jack Carr, talks about is there's a scene where Tom Reece and Quinn are on the beach having an R&R at China Beach, and they meet this young surfy guy who's like the character out of Apocalypse Now as well. And one of the lines he has in the book, he says, "Charlie, don't surf," which is a very sort of popular culture idea that comes from Apocalypse Now, where Robert Duvall's Colonel Kilgore says to the soldier, "You either surf or fight. Charlie, don't surf." And so Jack Carr kind of puts that role in, and I guess he's sort of giving a nod to some of the inspiration for his book, CRY HAVOC. Now, so the French colonial history is played through the rich businessman who runs a rubber plantation and his beautiful daughter, who is set to take over the company once the father retires. Now the thing is, the Apocalypse, if you look at the Apocalypse Now French plantation scene, it's darker, it's more ambiguous. It's kind of like Willard is going into hell, and he's kind of passing through one of the 9 circles of hell. And but the French plantation, reminiscent of the French colonial era that Jack Carr expresses, is very different. These are sophisticated aristocrats. They are business people who've been there for decades, and they are ambiguous about what is going to happen in the war. And sort of Jack Carr plays on this because no one knows the future of the Americans in Vietnam, but yet by 1968, that's kind of like a turning point, a linchpin. And that's, and again, that's important because that's the linchpin where Tom Reece himself, a young SEAL, then starts his transition into becoming a CIA operative, which I'm not sure if Jack Carr is going to be releasing any other Tom Reece books, or he's going to go back to James Reece in the future. Time will tell. So one of the other funny things that, or one of the unique things, I'm not saying unique only to Jack Carr, but he does a lot of product placement in his novels. But he doesn't do. Product placement. We know about product placement in movies, where they're basically Pepsi machines or Coke machines or whatever, and these companies pay, put a Coke machine in this scene and whatever, will put some money towards the film. Now, in fact, there is a history of product placement being given to certain writers. In fact, there was a whole book, which I only just found out while I was researching this one. William Boyd wrote a thriller, and it was actually paid for by Land Rover, because obviously Land Rover must feature a great deal in the book. And the name of that book is The Vanishing Game. So that was paid for by Land Rover. And another one, the Bulgari, which is a fashion brand, they paid author Faye Weldon also to write a novel for them. Now, I'm not saying that Jack Carr is doing this. I'm just saying that he product places to set up the scene, to give you an idea. For instance, he talks about Randall-made Model 14 knife with a black Mick Carter handle. And that's actually, there's a real company. It was founded by a guy called Bo Randall. And you can go online, and they have a website, Randall Knives. I think they're in Florida. Also, mentions a lot of booze, a lot of bourbons, a lot of champagnes, and they're always really upmarket brands, because if his aristocratic characters are usually the ones who are drinking these. And this one, there's a lot of Russian KGB members who are drinking, what do they call it? Stolichnaya. And apparently it's been rebranded because it's not actually Russian, it's Ukrainian, and I think it's been rebranded Stoli in 2022 because they didn't want to use the same name. I don't know. I just read that as well. Also, you can things like donning his black Cool Ray sunglasses. That's on page 112. And basically, if you look it up, the new 2025 collection available on the Ocularium website, where these original black cool ray sunglasses were designed in the 50s and 60s, and maybe through movies and literature, some of these sunglasses are making a comeback, and it's good because because Carr is trying to build an image of the time. For instance, he talks, there's a lot of smoking in this one, so you've got Lucky Strikes, Marlboros, Virginia Slims. These are all sort of titled as you go through the novel. So it's interesting. Like I said, it builds a picture of the time, because there's a lot of restaurant scenes, there's a lot of drinking scenes, card playing scenes where various items are used. For instance, even one thing, I think the Russian guy, one of the Russian bad guys, he has a rectangular A. Lang and Son watch, and that's an actual brand of watch that's still made today. And again, he gives Carr sort of dresses his characters up, not just in this book, and I guess in the CRY HAVOC book, he's talking about it because he's trying to create the sweat, the uncomfortableness of Westerners in Vietnam during that time, who are battling this strange war. The Vietnam War was a hot war against the East and the West, and there's a lot of talk about from the Russians. And from Americans, particularly as the Russians have people who are spying for the Americans, and the Americans have characters who are spying for the Russians. And a lot of people get their comeuppance because basically everything centers around the 1968 Tet Offensive, and that exposes a lot of problems, code breaking and things like that. Okay, so it's one of those things where people... I see a lot of sort of irrational sort of hatred for Jack Carr's books because, I don't know, it's the climate, the political climate we're in. Whereas these books are, like, I read this book so well, it was like a hot knife through butter. I went through it. It's very entertaining. It's a fun read, but I couldn't recommend this book to a lot of people because some people are just far too sensitive. And there's a lot of great violent scenes in it. And even, don't forget, Jack Carr was a SEAL. He was in the United States military for like 20 years. And this guy did a lot of shit in, I guess, Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. So he's not talking out of his ass. He's been there, done that. And you never really hear Jack Carr when you watch his podcasts. He doesn't big note himself. He comes across as a sort of down to earth kind of bloke. I don't know what he's like in real life because I don't know him, never met him. I've seen him on Joe Rogan quite a few times. Every time I release a book, I think it was Joe Rogan who first introduced me to Jack Carr when he first released the Terminal List. I think that was around 2019, maybe around then, I'm not sure. But essentially, it is a genre book, and you can't say read it because people are so go off their tops about nothing. There's the sort of era of pettiness we live in. But is it entertaining? Yes. Is it fun to read? Yes. Is it easy to read? Yes. Is it interesting? Yes. So it's got all these things, but the subject matter, the topic, the period kind of puts people off. And obviously, it's an exaggerated expression of young men at war. Jack Carr himself has obviously been involved in some pretty horrible real life situations, and you get the feeling from the book. He describes everything, like the weapons, the tactics, the clothing, the banter between mates. He does that in a very, very level-headed way. But I think because he's experienced violence firsthand and war firsthand, he relies on our perspective of war and killing in a movie sense. That a lot of the war movies we saw and watch are always hyper real. They're not, the way explosions go off, the way people bleed, the way people die is always exaggerated in films for dramatic content. That's what it's for. And I think it's just funny that Jack Carr goes to a lot of effort to put in research on, boots and belts and knives and guns and silencers, and he goes to a great deal of trouble. And the dialogue between the dialogue between soldiers and comrades is for me is because I was in the military as well for 4 years. I mean, obviously I was just a medic. I wasn't a superhero SEAL or anything. And there is a lot of banter that I pick up from the way his characters talk to each other, the way they put shit on each other, and the way they try to shy away from big noting themselves. They're just trying to be. They enjoy. They're real warriors. Jack Carr's an actual warrior, and obviously Tom Reece and James Reece are warriors, but they're in fictional form here, and their actual role in the. I think if I would look forward to Jack Carr actually releasing a very, very real version of his own experiences, not necessarily true, but actually write a book and sort of describe an actual mission of how it went, whether or not they killed anyone or not, to give you that sense of how things can be in real life and how things are presented in novels and films, etc. So, Jack Carr, CRY HAVOC, masterful read, loved it. I literally couldn't put it down. I read it I read it basically in 3 different sittings over 2 days. I think the first time I stopped, I got the mark here, was after 248 pages, and I thought, no, I want to enjoy it. I want to keep it, I want to have something to read, and then I put it down after 343, and then I finished up at 534. So that was 3 different sittings over 2 days, and it's like I said, fun read, entertaining, very readable. If you're going on a flight and you've got 8 hours or 15 hours to kill, take this book along. It's fun. It'll really keep your eye of watching that big bloody plane on that small map as it trails across the Pacific. So, CRY HAVOC by Jack Carr, his 8th novel. His 9th book. He wrote a book about the Beirut, a non-fiction book about the Beirut bombing. I think that was back in 1983, I think. And his first Tom Reece book, and he's had 7 Jack Reece books, James Reece books, and who knows what he's coming up with next. He's got a podcast as well. The name escapes me, but he always has interesting people on. He goes through gear sometimes. He gets sent guns and knives and survival foods, and so it's real entertaining and very informative. Actually, let me find the name of the. I've got to find the name of the. What's it called? I wonder why I can't. It's very frustrating when you know something and you can't remember, because it's on the tip of my tongue. Because I've watched it. Oh, here we go. Danger Close Podcast. Whew. And as soon as I saw it, I went, yeah, that was it. Danger Close Podcast. I just watch my podcasts on YouTube, and so go check that out. And I think he is coming up on an episode of Joe Rogan again, or it might have just been very recently, maybe in the last week or so. I haven't checked, but I'll certainly be watching the next episode of Jack Carr on Joe Rogan show, because he's always filled with great stories. He talks about, he's a big fan of literature. He writes a lot of, he reads a great deal of books, and he's introduced me to some authors and authors that I've read since hearing about them. And so he's a great bloke, great writer, fun. He's an entertaining person, and so CRY HAVOC, Jack Carr, check it out. All right, what am I reading? What have I just read? Okay, these are. I think I read the. No, I think I've mentioned the Talisman, which I'd finished, and then I didn't. I just found out that there was a sequel to the Talisman, and it's called Black House. Man, I swear I'm up to page 4488. I got this on Saturday. Can't put it down. Excellent book. And hopefully tomorrow, the release of King Sorrow by Joe Hill, which I've ordered, and hopefully it'll turn up tomorrow because I want to get stuck into that too. All right, thanks for watching, and please like, subscribe, comment, make whatever you want to do, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks very much. Read, go to bookstores, check out your secondhand bookstores, go to your library, but the best thing of all, read and enjoy reading. Thank you.